Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to talk to you about something that's always been near and dear to my heart, which is fixed camera angles. Now I know it's sort of a weird thing to do a whole video on, but you know what else are you gonna watch? You know we still don't know anything about Resident Evil 2 remake. Capcom still continued to be silent, and I know that I'm not the only one who has a passion for these sorts of things. I think yeah, I have a lot of subscribers now, a lot more than I did, thanks to my last two videos, and that is amazing. First of all, because I've been doing this for like 3 years, and it's like I've been talking to myself. I mean, I'm super grateful for my earliest subscribers because they apparently liked what they saw, and that made me feel pretty good. But they weren't the chatty type, and there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't used to be so chatty, but you know, it now I can actually do a video like this and get some feedback. Whereas before, even though I've thought about doing a video like this in the past, I couldn't do it because, well, I mean, it's not that I couldn't do it. It's just, again, it would feel like I was talking to myself. So thanks for everybody who's been supporting me recently, who's come out and subscribed and watched my videos and made comments. It's fucking great. I'm not used to that, and it just really feels awesome. So, just to thank you guys for that, I want to come out with a video like this. Also, it helps to kill time while we wait for something from Capcom. And I happen to know a lot about the subject, so, here we go. So the first thing that I could say about fixed camera angles is we didn't used to call it fixed camera angles. We actually just used to say, yeah, that game's pretty cool. It's like Resident Evil, but with fill in the blank, Onimusha. It's like Resident Evil with samurais and, feudal Japan shit. Oh, cool. Dino Crisis. Oh, it's like Resident Evil, but with, dinosaurs. Every game used to be called It's Like Resident Evil, but with. And then you knew what they meant. It meant fixed camera angles. Sometimes it meant pre-rendered 2D backgrounds. Sometimes it meant fully 3D backgrounds, but you couldn't move the camera around. And fixed camera angles really started as sort of it was a response to hardware limitations, like a lot of things were. No one back then really mastered 3D movement. When a game was coming out, and if it was going to be a 2D side scroller, it was probably going to kick ass, whatever. If it was going to be an RPG, a JRPG, or whatever, and it was like top down, just like the old ones, it was probably going to be awesome. When you heard, this game's going to be cool, it's going to be fully 3D though, it was always hit or miss. It was like, okay, it could totally suck ass. And if it sucks ass, it's probably because, the camera's going to get in the way and it's just going to be awful. And a lot of games were hit or miss. When you heard your favorite, licensed game character, like Spider-Man or something, are going to get their own game, and you hear it's going to be 3D. Again, back then you didn't know if it was going to be a good game because, again, nobody really mastered 3D style control. And so the hardware limitations of just the controls, number one, and just the rendering of the environment. Sometimes the environments just totally look like shit. So, I mean, with 2D pre-rendered backgrounds, you could sort of solve that because the environments looked a lot more realistic. Because, again, I said in my last video, you're looking at a static frozen cutscene essentially, so of course it's going to look a lot more real and tangible than your actual 3D rendered character, which is going to look like ass basically. And Shinji Mikami, I've said this before, Resident Evil, even though it's credited as being the founder and inventor of the survival horror genre, it wasn't the first game to come along that was like that. It was actually Alone in the Dark, but Resident Evil gets the credit because it just did it better. It did it so much better, and it coined the phrase survival horror that, of course Resident Evil's going to get the credit. But Shinji Mikami originally wanted to make Resident Evil 1, a first-person horror game, and part of the limitations of that was, 3D environments, it's hard to fucking make and look good. But then he got a look at Alone in the Dark and was like, that's awesome, that's perfect, let's do it that way. And you saw that kind of thing a lot back then. I mean, to an extent, you still see it to this day. A bunch of developers copying each other. But who can fucking blame them? I mean, if it works, it works. A lot of people copied Resident Evil after that because, 2D pre-rendered backgrounds looked superior, and nobody had mastered 3D style movement, and the tank controls on top of the 2D pre-rendered backgrounds were one way of getting around, really clunky 3D controls that weren't perfect. Today a lot of people consider those tank controls to be total shit, but back then they really, really worked. Up was always forward. Left and right turned the character. Down was to move the character backward. It fucking worked back then. And it was the only way we wanted to play a game like that because, it was reliable. And nowadays, yeah, we have much better controls, but again, back then there was no better way to do it. And so even though I'd love to see a return to a lot of fixed camera angle games, I know that the tank controls are a thing of the past. They're never coming back. So it's a shame that you're watching Until Dawn right now, and it's a great game, and Telltale games are great games, and Heavy Rain and all of that. They're great games, but it's a shame that we only see fixed camera angles in games like that. And I just want it doesn't even have to be Capcom. It would be great to see a survival horror game like this because the camera angles that are fixed, they create such a sense of dread that you don't see in modern survival horror games anymore. Sure, they can be, they're great games still, but the whole time while I was playing Until Dawn, I kept thinking, man, it'd be fucking great if I had to worry about like zombies and had to shoot them and shit because the environments look really scary. They look awesome. But alas, unless somebody takes the plunge and goes forward with a game like this that's survival horror that has combat, who knows if we'll ever see another survival horror game like this again. One mistake I feel the Silent Hill series made was going to the over-the-shoulder perspective, because honestly, it didn't need to. I liked Silent Hill Homecoming, but it didn't need to go over the shoulder. Silent Hill never needed to. It added to the... Because Silent Hill protagonists were never, cops or former military like in Resident Evil. Silent Hill, it was an experiment in the surreal and the terrifying and the disturbing, and the fixed camera angles really lent itself to that. Not only that, but fixed camera angles really are the best way to showcase the creepy environment. Silent Hill was notorious for that weird, creepy shit in the environment, and this sounds contradictory, but when you give full camera control to the player, you're not actually, most of the time, unless you're very diligent, you're not going to see everything you're supposed to see. If you're not looking up or down, at just the right place in the room, you're going to miss, some creepy things, and items are going to be missable. And so one of the things I think a lot of proponents of fixed camera angles make the mistake of doing, and I'm guilty of it as well, is we always talk about the disadvantage of, fixed camera angles, as a way of making the game artificially harder. In Resident Evil, you go into a room, you hear zombies shuffling around, or you hear lickers or whatever, and we can't see where they are immediately. And we always hold that up as it being, adds to the tension, and it does. We're not wrong about that. But one thing we never do is talk about the advantages of the fixed camera angle, and one of those is map memorization. I mean, you put on Resident Evil 1, and I know, most of you, I certainly am, you don't even need to look at the map because you already know the layout of the mansion, because the fixed camera angles are always going to be the fixed camera angles, and you know where to go immediately. You pop on Final Fantasy VII, and you know how to get out of Sector 7 slums. I mean, you know how to get to out of Midgar and to the train and how to get to Calm and all that. I mean, all the fixed camera angles, it really lends itself to map memorization, which makes backtracking easier to do. And like I said, we don't talk about the advantages enough. And so I think a lot of game developers, only look to the fixed camera angles for games like this, like Until Dawn and the Telltale games, because, they don't think it's, well, A, they're not setting out to make an action game or a survival horror game, but B, I think even people that are looking to make an action or a survival horror game don't ever look to the fixed camera angle views because they think it's impractical, that it's counterproductive to being able to take out enemies and things like that. And they're not entirely wrong about that, but part of the challenge is making it so that it's not too easy or too hard. There has to be a careful balance, because I mean there's a lot of things to consider if you're going to make a fixed camera angle survival horror game. I mean, obviously you're not going to use the tank controls because they're too prohibitive, but how's the lock-on going to work? Because in the classic Resident Evil games, your lock-on would only snap the character in the direction of the enemy, but it didn't track the enemy's movement. So, if you pressed R1 and you aimed at something and you didn't see what you were aiming at, if you just stayed there for a second, the zombie's going to move out of your, out of the character's field of view, and if you hit, the X button, you're going to fire and not hit anything. So you had to constantly, readjust your aim with L1 or whatever, so that you were making sure that you were aiming at something. In other games, like even, talking about Capcom games, Devil May Cry. Now that was a different kind of game entirely. It was all about, combat. So when you hit R1, you were going to aim at an enemy, and you were going to stay aimed at that enemy. Onimusha, same thing. R1, you're going to track the movements of that enemy. But would that make the game too easy? Because, as long as you were holding down the lock-on button, you were going to be aiming at something? These are things to consider. I don't think it necessarily would, because, again, you don't have perfect aim. You can't aim straight for the head, so you're going to be firing just as many bullets as you would normally fire in a Resident Evil game. Plus, we've had other survival horror games or similar horror games do that. I mean, one of my favorites is on the GameCube, Eternal Darkness. When you aimed at something, you could then target a monster's, individual limbs, and it was the shit. So, it can be done, but the question is, what kind of controls would you want to give that wouldn't make the game either too much of a challenge or not enough of a challenge whatsoever? I mean, there are things to consider, and I think a lot of developers, if they haven't thought about it at all, that's one thing, but if they have, I think that's a very vexing problem. I mean, they would need to test it out. I have a sneaking suspicion that, not to toot my own horn here, but I have a sneaking suspicion that there haven't been any game developers actually think this way, that they haven't even considered it, and that I'm the one really actually going through the motions as if I'm going to make my own game, which I know nothing about game development, sadly. Otherwise, I would make a game like that. But I am an idea guy. I will give you my ideas, and I think that's one way they could do it. The other thing to consider is, if they're going to be fixed camera angles, are you going to give full analog control to the stick? If you move it all the way, the character will run, or does walking need to be part of the atmosphere? Does there need to be a run button to get your character to run? There are a lot of things to consider, like I said. Come to think of it, I guess I should correct myself. It's not that I don't know anything about game development, I just don't know how to code. I actually know a lot about the process and the history of companies and things like that. Yeah, I just don't know how to code myself. But that's neither here nor there. The other advantage I think that a lot of games with fixed camera angles offer is finding items is easier, as long as you go into every room and you make sure by looking at the map that you've been in every room and combed every corner of that room. Because of the fixed camera angles, you almost can never miss an item, and you can just kind of go off a checklist of every room you've been in. When there's a puzzle that's hard to solve, as long as you find all the items available, you know that you have something in your inventory that will help you solve a puzzle. And that isn't really offered much. I mean, I'm glad Resident Evil 7 brought back the whole inventory system and items that you needed to get into certain places, because that's a trend I'm glad to see returned. I hope that really does come back, in full force. But yeah, back in these the old fixed camera angle days, you saw that a lot. I think also the graphics are where they are today, and I don't think we necessarily need to go back to 2D pre-rendered backgrounds, even though they would look fucking amazing if we did. But no, graphics, hold up today. That we could render a world in fully 3D, and that way you could knock over shit, and there would be real physics and things like that. So, these are the questions you would need to ask if you wanted to make a fixed camera angle, good old survival horror game. And I don't think anybody's really talking about it. And like I said, I'm making this video to kind of promote a discussion about it. I mean, I want you guys to let me know what you guys think. How would you do it? I mean, am I off track here? Are fixed camera angles just a thing of the past? I'm just a fucking dinosaur for wanting them to come back? I mean, seriously, let me know. I don't think I could be too off track, though, because for the simple fact that there are still games that use fixed camera angles. I mean, some of them you don't even think of as fixed camera angle games, like God of War. That was the God of War trilogy and the PSP games. Those were fixed camera angles. You had no control over the camera. So certain action platformers like that, the fixed camera angle worked really well. Plus, there was never a moment of disorientation when you suddenly switched angles, because the camera, while fixed, sort of followed the character, so it was easy to sort of transition from area to area. Is that a technique you would maybe use if you wanted to make a survival horror game? I mean, certain games even got kind of creative. If you look at Heavy Rain, you remember how you moved in that game? You actually held down the R2 button, like a real tank, true tank controls, and the character would move forward, and you would use the left stick to make them go in a direction, just to change the direction. But you just hold L2 and they move forward. So that was one way that they sort of creatively got around fixed camera angles. But I don't know if it really worked out as well, because they didn't really try it again with their next game, Beyond Two Souls. They just just back to the stick again. So different games are using different ways, creative ways. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to regular control with the left stick. And with Heavy Rain, you moved Ethan with R2, like I said. And, not Ethan Winters, but Ethan Mars. He of the famous Jason call. I mean, yeah, it's funny, but it's too bad memes weren't as big of a thing back then, because they would meme it up with the Ethan Mars from Heavy Rain. I could just see one today where Ethan's looking for Jason, and he's like, Jason, and then Uganda Knuckles shows up and he's like, Jason is in Uganda, brother. Come, I will show you the way. Yeah, you're welcome to all those meme makers out there. I just gave you a sweet idea for your next meme. There you go. Give me the credit, but you can have that's yours now. It's a gift from me to you. But so what do you guys think? I mean, do you think fixed camera angles should be brought back in survival horror games? I mean, should they not be brought back? Did you like any of my ideas? Do you have any ideas of your own? I mean, tell me what you would do. Let me know. I mean, if you don't think they should be brought back, if you think I'm way off base, tell me why. I'd like to hear why, because that's kind of how we all grow as a gaming community, is to listen to each other's ideas, and if we disagree, explain why. That's all I'm asking. That's all I expect from myself and from the people who watch my videos. So I mean, let me know what you guys think. Again, it's going to be great to get all your feedback, because I couldn't count on that always before in the past. But I really appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a like. Consider subscribing, and I'll hope to see you guys again soon. See you next time.